The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Newport High School gymnasium in the small coastal town of Newport, California. Commander Sarah Mitchell sat in the bleachers, dressed in her Navy dress uniform, dark blue with white trim, every medal perfectly positioned on her chest. She had waited for this day for 18 years. Her twin daughters, Emma and Lisa, were about to walk across the stage and receive their high school diplomas. Sarah had missed so much during their childhood. Deployments lasting 6, 8, sometimes 12 months at a time. Birthdays on Navy ships. Christmas mornings watching their faces through a computer screen instead of in person. She had given up so much for her country, and they had given up having their mother there when it mattered most. But today was about them. Today, she was here. Fully present. Her uniform was a way of showing the girls she was proud of her service, yes, but more importantly, it was a promise that she had kept her own oath, to protect and serve, even when it meant protecting and serving far from home. Sarah had spent 23 years in the Navy SEAL teams. She was one of the first women to ever serve in that role. Those early years had been brutal. Not just the training, though that had nearly broken her body 1,000 times, but the attitude. The sideways glances. The whispered comments in the locker room. The men who said women didn't belong in combat roles. The commanding officers who seemed disappointed when she outperformed their expectations. She had been mocked for having a softer voice. Mocked for her smaller frame. Mocked for choosing to have children, as if being a mother somehow made her less of a soldier. Other women in the military had faced the same things, but for Sarah, it had been intensified. She hadn't just joined the Navy. She had joined the Navy SEALs, the elite unit where every single person was supposed to be the absolute best. For years, Sarah had responded the same way she always did: she got better. She trained harder. She studied more. She earned her respect one mission at a time. She had been involved in operations across Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Middle East. She had saved lives. She had lost friends. She had been wounded twice and came back. She had become one of the most decorated female soldiers in her branch. But all of that felt distant now as she watched the processional begin. She had written a letter to each of her daughters and left it on their beds this morning. In the letters, she apologized for the times she wasn't there. She explained that her service had always been about making the world safer for them, and for all the other children in this country who deserved to grow up without fear. The ceremony began, and Sarah's eyes never left her daughters. Emma walked first, alphabetically. Then, minutes later, Lisa crossed the stage. As each name was called, Sarah clapped with the other proud parents. Her heart swelled. These two beautiful women, they had become who they were despite having a mother who was absent so much. They had become strong, independent, and kind. They were a testament to the power of the human spirit, not to their mother's presence, but to their own resilience. After the ceremony, Sarah made her way to the gymnasium side entrance where families were gathering for photos. She was intercepted by a man in a Marine captain's dress uniform. His name tag read Douglas, and he was tall, with a stern face and eyes that seemed to be looking for something beneath her skin. "Commander Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. Sarah shook it politely. "Captain Douglas. Good to see you. Are your children graduating today?" "My daughter is in Emma and Lisa's class," he said. "We haven't met before, but I've heard about you. You're quite the decorated service member." "I do my job," Sarah said simply. "Like everyone else in uniform." Captain Douglas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that right? Well, I wanted to say congratulations on the girls. They're good kids. Very well-mannered." "Thank you, sir. I'm proud of them." As Sarah turned to walk away, her dress uniform caught the light, and the tattoo on her left forearm became visible. It was a small symbol, a trident with specific markings that had profound meaning within the SEAL community. The trident was the mark of the Navy SEALs. But these markings were different. More personal. They told a story. Sarah saw Captain Douglas's face go pale. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked like he might say something more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked away quickly, leaving Sarah confused about what had just happened. She pushed the moment aside. It was a day for celebration, not for whatever strange reaction a Marine captain had to her tattoo. She joined her daughters for photos, hugging them tightly, telling them how proud she was. They smiled and laughed and complained about how hot it was in their graduation robes. But in the back of her mind, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Captain Douglas's reaction had been too intense, too immediate. Whatever he had seen in that tattoo meant something to him. Something that had scared him, or angered him, or both. She would remember that moment. And soon enough, she would understand why it mattered more than she could possibly have imagined. 3 days after the graduation ceremony, Sarah received a phone call at her office on the naval base. She was the commanding officer of a training facility for special operations personnel, a position she had earned through years of exceptional service. She expected the call to be about a scheduling matter or a training update. Instead, it was from Captain Douglas. "Commander Mitchell, I'd like to set up a meeting with you. Alone." "It's important," he said without preamble. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had no reason to meet with a Marine captain, and she certainly had no reason to meet with him alone. But something in his voice, urgency mixed with concern, made her pause. "What's this about, Captain? I can't discuss it over the phone. Please. Can we meet tomorrow morning? There's a coffee shop near the base. The Lighthouse Cafe. 6 o'clock. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed. She wanted answers about his strange reaction at the graduation. And she had learned long ago that answers were often worth the risk of uncomfortable conversations. The next morning, Sarah sat at a small corner table in the Lighthouse Cafe, a quiet place where the morning crowd was minimal. Captain Douglas arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. He looked like he hadn't slept. His uniform was pressed and perfect, but his eyes were red-rimmed and worried. He sat down across from her and took a long breath. "I need to ask you about your tattoo," he said without small talk. "The one on your left forearm. The trident with the initials beneath it." Sarah's back stiffened. "That's a personal tattoo, Captain. With all due respect, it's not your concern. Those initials. Are they for Marcus Douglas?" The coffee shop suddenly felt very small. Sarah's mind raced back 24 years. To a mission in Kandahar, Afghanistan. To a young Navy corpsman named Marcus Douglas who had been embedded with her SEAL team. To the moment when an IED, an improvised explosive device, had torn through their convoy. To the moment when she had crawled through the dust and blood to get to Marcus, knowing even as she moved that it was too late. She had gotten him a tattoo to remember him. A way of carrying him with her every single day for the rest of her life. "I need to know," Captain Douglas continued, his voice breaking slightly, "if you were there. If you knew my brother. If you were with him when he died." Sarah felt the weight of the world settle on her shoulders. She had told herself that she would never speak about what happened on that mission. It was classified. The details were sealed. The personnel involved had all signed documents promising never to disclose information about the operation. But this man sitting across from her was Marcus Douglas's brother. He was a fellow service member. He deserved the truth. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I was there. I'm the one who held him." Captain Douglas's face crumpled, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might break down completely. But he held himself together, taking several shaky breaths before continuing. "I've been trying for years to find out what really happened. My family got a briefing that told us he died in the line of duty, but it was vague. Generic. Like they didn't want us to know the details. My mother died 3 years ago without ever really understanding how her son had died. And my father, he paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. My father has always believed that something was covered up. Sarah remained silent. She couldn't say anything about classified information. It would be a violation of her oath and the law. I'm not asking you to break any regulations, Captain Douglas said, as if reading her mind. But I need to know that you remember him. That his death mattered to you. That he wasn't just a casualty on some report. He mattered, Sarah said. He was brave. He was kind. He wrote letters to his family, even in the middle of dangerous missions, because he wanted them to know he was thinking of them. He made jokes to keep morale up, even when we were in the scariest situations I've ever experienced. And yes, I remember him. I carry him with me every day. That's why I got the tattoo. Captain Douglas wiped his eyes. Thank you, he said. Thank you for that. But something else was building in his expression, a kind of anger that was separate from his grief. There's something else, he said. Something I need to ask you about. When I was going through my brother's emails, the ones they gave us back, I found correspondence with another Marine. Someone in command on that mission. There are references to something going wrong. To orders not being followed correctly. To someone making a decision that shouldn't have been made. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly what he was talking about. On that mission, there had been a failure in communication. A directive from a commanding officer that had contradicted their training and their tactical assessment. Sarah and her team had questioned the order. But they had followed it anyway. It was protocol. You follow the chain of command. That decision had cost lives. I can't discuss it, Sarah said. I know. I'm not asking you to. Captain Douglas leaned forward. But I need you to know that I've been investigating on my own. I've been reaching out to people who were there. Some have talked to me. Some have refused. And what I'm hearing suggests that the official story about what happened wasn't entirely accurate. Captain. There's a general coming to the base next week, he interrupted. General Richard Harmon. He was a colonel on that operation. He's being considered for a promotion to a very high position, possibly chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And I have reason to believe he was involved in decisions that led to my brother's death. Not just involved, responsible. Sarah stood up. She had heard enough. Captain Douglas, I sympathize with your loss. I truly do. But I can't be part of this. I can't participate in any kind of investigation that involves classified information. I'm not asking you to investigate, he said, standing as well. I'm just asking you to tell the truth when the time comes. And it will come, Commander. I promise you that. Sarah left the cafe without responding. But his words followed her like a shadow. The truth. She had been carrying the weight of the truth for so long, keeping it buried, locked away in the classified section of her mind marked, "Do not speak." What if that truth needed to come out? What if the sacrifice of soldiers like Marcus Douglas demanded that it be heard? As she drove back to the base, Sarah realized that her comfortable life, the life she had built carefully around her daughters and her career, was about to become much more complicated. For the next 7 days, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling of her small ranch house, replaying memories she had spent years trying to forget. She thought about Marcus Douglas. About the moment when she realized he was gone. About the weight of his body in her arms. About the blood that had soaked into her uniform and wouldn't wash out completely, no matter how many times she tried. She thought about the mission briefing beforehand. About the point where Colonel Richard Harmon had changed the route of their convoy. About how several team members, including Sarah, had questioned the decision because it took them through known areas of insurgent activity. About how Harmon had overruled the objections and said the new route was necessary for reasons he couldn't discuss. The route that killed 5 servicemen. The route that had been marked as a tactical error in the official report, but blamed on a breakdown in communication, rather than on the decision to go through that area in the first place. Sarah had never spoken to anyone about her doubts regarding that decision. Not to her superior officers. Not to her therapist at the VA hospital where she had worked through PTSD in the years after the mission. Not to her ex-husband, from whom she had been divorced for 5 years. Certainly not to Emma and Lisa, who were still learning who their mother really was. But now, the question that Captain Douglas had posed haunted her: what if the truth needed to come out? She reached out to other members of her team from that mission. 3 of them were still in the military. 1 had been discharged with a service-related disability. 2 others had retired. She started with a discreet phone call to Lieutenant Commander James Winters, who had been her second-in-command on the operation. "I need to talk to you about Kandahar," she said without preamble when he picked up. There was a long pause. "Sarah, you know we can't talk about that. I know what the regulations say. But James, I need to know if you ever questioned whether the right information was given in the reports. Whether the truth about what happened was fully disclosed." Another pause. "Where is this coming from? Marcus Douglas's brother contacted me. He's asking questions." Sarah heard James take a sharp breath. "How much have you told him?" "Nothing about the operation." "I can't." "But James, is there something that should have been disclosed? Something that wasn't?" "Sarah, you're putting me in an impossible position." "I know. And I'm sorry. But I need to know what you think." There was a very long pause. Then, quietly, "Yes. I think there's something that wasn't fully disclosed. I've always thought that. But bringing it up now would be complicated. Very complicated." "Because of Harmon's promotion?" "Partly. Also because there are a lot of senior officers who were involved in the decision-making on that operation. Reopening it could implicate all of them. And it could raise questions about how the military handles its own mistakes." After Sarah hung up, she sat with that thought. How the military handles its own mistakes. How institutions in general handle their own mistakes. By protecting themselves. By protecting the people in charge. By keeping the burden of silence on the people who witnessed the truth. She reached out to 2 other team members over the next few days. Both had similar responses. They agreed that something hadn't been right about the official story, but they were reluctant to discuss it, and even more reluctant to take any action that might reopen the investigation. One of them, a former SEAL named Robert Chen, was more direct. "Sarah, do you know what happens when you try to contradict the official military narrative on something like this? You become a problem. And the military doesn't like problems. Your career could be destroyed. You could be facing legal action. Your security clearance could be revoked. They don't just let you expose something like this and walk away unscathed." "But the truth," Sarah started. "The truth is complicated," Robert interrupted. "The truth is that good men made difficult decisions in a combat situation, and sometimes those decisions have tragic outcomes. The truth is also that those decisions were potentially questionable. But the truth is also that reopening it serves no one except people looking to score political points or people trying to get justice for their families. And sometimes, Sarah, we have to choose what kind of truth we can live with." After the call, Sarah walked out to her backyard and sat beneath the oak tree where she had built a small bench years ago. It had been her thinking place. The place where she came when she needed to quiet her mind and figure out what she believed. She believed that Marcus Douglas deserved to have the truth about his death made known. She believed that General Harmon, now Colonel, and about to be elevated further, should not be promoted if he had made mistakes that led to the death of soldiers under his command. She believed that covering up those mistakes was a form of dishonor to the service itself. But she also understood the stakes. Understanding that didn't make it easier to ignore her conscience. It made it harder. That night, Sarah made a decision. She would meet with Captain Douglas again. She would listen to what he had uncovered. And then she would decide whether her silence was a form of loyalty to her service, or a form of betrayal. Captain Douglas met Sarah at the same cafe, but this time in the early afternoon when there were more people around. He carried a thick folder. "I want you to understand something," he said as he sat down. "I'm not trying to destroy anyone's career. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I just want to know what really happened to my brother, and I want to make sure that the person responsible is held accountable. Even if that person is a high-ranking military officer." He opened the folder and showed her documents, emails, and photographs. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what she was looking at. These were pieces of the original incident report, the uncensored version. They were copies that had been obtained through military contacts that Douglas had developed over years of investigating. In the documents, there were notes from officers questioning the decision to reroute the convoy. There were communications from the field indicating concern about the security of the new route. And there were notes from a logistics officer about pressure from higher command to prioritize something other than troop safety, though the specific reason had been redacted in all versions of the report. "I have a whistleblower contact," Douglas said quietly. "Someone who was in command at that time and who has agreed to testify if there's a formal investigation. But they won't come forward without another person on the record. Someone who was actually there. Someone with credibility and nothing to gain by speaking out." He looked at Sarah directly. "I'm asking you to be that person." Sarah's hands were shaking. She clasped them together tightly. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to potentially end my career. To be investigated myself. To break the silence that has protected me and my family for over 2 decades. "I understand exactly what I'm asking," Douglas said. "And I'm asking it anyway, because my brother deserves it. Because your team members deserve it. Because the truth deserves it." "And what happens to General Harmon?" "He'll be investigated. If the investigation confirms what I believe, he'll be discharged from the military. His promotion will be rejected. His reputation will be damaged. But he'll be alive. Unlike my brother, who is dead because of decisions he made." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Around them, the cafe hummed with the sounds of normal life. A couple at the next table laughed. An espresso machine hissed. A little girl asked her mother for a cookie. All of these normal moments continued, regardless of what happened in this conversation. Regardless of what Sarah decided. The world kept turning. "I need to speak with Emma and Lisa," Sarah said finally. "Of course. And I need to speak with my commanding officer." "That's your call." "If I do this, I want you to understand something," Sarah said. "This isn't about revenge or about making Harmon look bad. This is about my oath. I swore to support and defend the Constitution. Part of that means telling the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Douglas reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "Thank you," he said. Sarah met with her daughters that evening. She sat them down in the living room of her house and told them the truth about the mission in Kandahar. She told them about Marcus Douglas. She told them about the possibility that their mother might become involved in a high-profile investigation. She told them that if she did, their family would likely be scrutinized. The media would probably get involved. Things would be complicated and sometimes painful. "Why are you telling us this?" Emma asked. "Because I need you to understand that sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost. I've spent your entire lives trying to protect you from difficulty. But maybe the lesson you need to learn is that protecting yourself from difficulty sometimes means compromising your integrity. And I don't want you to ever do that. Are you going to testify?" Lisa asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes. I think I am." Her daughters were quiet for a moment. Then Lisa said, "We're proud of you, Mom." Emma added, "Even if it makes things hard." The next day, Sarah requested an urgent meeting with her commanding officer, Admiral Patricia Chin. Chen was a woman who had also broken barriers in the military, and Sarah respected her deeply. Sarah told her everything. She showed her the documents that Captain Douglas had compiled. She explained her intention to participate in a formal investigation into the decision-making that had led to the deaths on that mission in Kandahar. Admiral Chen listened without interrupting. When Sarah was done, Chen sat back in her chair and took off her glasses. "Do you understand that this could damage your career?" Chen asked. "Yes." "Do you understand that this could create a political firestorm?" "Yes." "Do you understand that there are people in very high positions who will view you as a threat?" Admiral Chen put her glasses back on and looked at Sarah directly. "Then I want to tell you something. About 15 years ago, when I was being considered for my current position, I was asked to overlook some questionable decisions made by a superior officer. I was told that bringing up those decisions would be bad for morale, bad for the Navy, bad for the force as a whole. And I almost accepted that reasoning. Almost." Chen paused. "But then I thought about my oath. And I thought about all the people who had died serving under leaders who made mistakes and then covered those mistakes up. And I decided that my career wasn't as important as my integrity. So I testified. And yes, it was difficult. But I've never regretted it." She stood and extended her hand to Sarah. "You have the Navy's support in this matter, Commander. Officially and unofficially. The investigation took 6 months. Sarah gave her testimony in a formal military hearing room, in front of a 3-person board composed of senior officers who had no connection to the original mission. She described the decision-making process on that day in Kandahar. She answered questions about her understanding of protocol, about the discussions that had taken place regarding the convoy route, about what had happened in the minutes and hours after the explosion. The investigation also called James Winters, Robert Chen, and 2 other team members. It called the whistleblower, a retired general named Michael Sanderson, who had been a colonel on the operation and had subsequently questioned the decision-making but had been persuaded to remain silent by senior officers who told him that reopening the investigation would be bad for the military. The investigation called General Richard Harmon, who denied any wrongdoing and claimed that the decision to change the convoy route had been made based on intelligence that he could not discuss due to its classified nature. The investigation called military logisticians and intelligence officers. It called commanders who had been involved in the decision to pressure the operations team to prioritize an objective that, according to several witnesses, had been more important than personnel safety. And slowly, painstakingly, a picture emerged of a decision-making process that had prioritized a classified military objective over the safety of the personnel executing the mission. When Harmon had been told that the original convoy route was safer, he had overruled the assessment and insisted on the new route because the classified objective, the capture of a Taliban communications officer, required access to a particular area. The communications officer was never captured. The objective was ultimately not achieved. But 5 servicemen were killed in the attempt. The investigation's conclusion was that while no single person bore absolute responsibility for the deaths, the decision-making process was fundamentally flawed. General Richard Harmon's role in insisting on a route that had been flagged as dangerous, without adequately weighing the risks against the potential benefits, was determined to be a significant failure in command judgment. Harmon was formally censured. His security clearance was revoked. His promotion was rejected. He was given the option to retire with full honors, which he took. But more importantly, for Sarah's purposes, the investigation also formally acknowledged that the original report about the incident had been incomplete. A new, more comprehensive version of the report was filed, and Marcus Douglas's family was given a private briefing about what had really happened on that day in Kandahar. For the first time in over 2 decades, they had answers. Captain Douglas contacted Sarah 3 weeks after the investigation concluded. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said when they met at the Lighthouse Cafe once more. "I brought my father with me." Sarah turned to see an older man, probably in his late 70s, with kind eyes that looked very much like Marcus's had. He stood and extended his hand to Sarah. "I'm Thomas Douglas," he said. "I'm Marcus's father. I've waited a very long time to understand what happened to my son. Thanks to you, I finally do. Sarah found that she was crying. I'm sorry I couldn't protect him, she said. You did protect him, Thomas said. You were with him. You held him. And then, all these years later, you made sure that the truth about how he died would be known. That's protection. That's honor. That's what I've needed to know was true. Sarah's daughters attended the military ceremony where she was awarded the Medal of Valor, not for her service in combat, but for her service to the truth. Admiral Patricia Chen presented the award, speaking publicly about the importance of integrity and about the courage required to do the right thing even when the right thing comes with significant personal cost. After the ceremony, Emma and Lisa hugged their mother tightly. We knew you were brave, Emma said. But we didn't really understand how brave until now. Sarah looked at her daughters, these strong, independent young women who had grown up with a mother who was often absent, but who had learned from that absence to be self-reliant and principled. I learned bravery from you, Sarah said. You were brave every time you had to say goodbye at an airport. Every time you went to a school event and your mother wasn't there. You never complained. You never made me feel guilty. You just kept going. 3 months later, Sarah was honored again, this time by the civilian community. The town of Newport held a day in her honor, and hundreds of people lined the streets. Among them were Marcus Douglas's family members. Captain Douglas stood with his father, and they both applauded as Sarah's car drove slowly down Main Street. Sarah had also been offered a promotion to a position that would have taken her off active duty and moved her into pure administrative work. She had declined. Instead, she had requested to stay in her current position, training the next generation of special operations soldiers. She wanted to pass on the lessons she had learned. She wanted to make sure that the people she trained understood that their oath to the Constitution meant something real. It meant defending it, even against people within the military itself, even when it was difficult. On a quiet evening, Sarah sat beneath the oak tree in her backyard, in the place where she did her best thinking. She looked at the tattoo on her left forearm, the trident with Marcus Douglas's initials beneath it. For over 20 years, it had been a private memorial. Now, it was a public symbol of her commitment to the truth. She thought about the question that had started everything: why had Captain Douglas's reaction to the tattoo been so intense? The answer was simple. He had recognized the initials. He had known, immediately, that this woman, this decorated Navy SEAL, this commanding officer, this mother of twins, had been with his brother in his final moments. He had recognized that she was someone who could give him answers. And more importantly, he had recognized that she was someone with the character to do the right thing, even when the right thing was hard. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean in the distance. The light turned gold and then red, painting the sky with colors that seemed almost impossible to be real. Sarah watched it change, moment by moment, the day transforming into evening. She thought about how people were like that too. How you could spend years in one state, in silence, in protection, in the safety of keeping secrets, and then, with the right catalyst, you could transform. You could become something new. Something more honest. Something more whole. She thought about how she had spent her entire career proving that she belonged in a place where women had been told they didn't belong. She had proven it through strength, through skill, through dedication. But the most important thing she had proven was this: that her integrity mattered more than her career. That the truth mattered more than comfort. That honor was sometimes uncomfortable, and that was exactly how you knew it was real. The Medal of Valor hung on a shelf in her bedroom. Her daughters had placed it there, in a place of prominence. Next to it was a photograph from Marcus Douglas's memorial service, which had been held again after the investigation concluded. This time, with the truth about what had really happened acknowledged by the military itself. Sarah had put the photograph there to remind herself every single day why she had done what she had done. Not for medals. Not for recognition. But because some things mattered more than safety, more than comfort, more than career advancement. Some things mattered because they were true. And because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. You can't pretend you don't understand what you understand. And if you try to live as if you don't understand, you become complicit in the lies. She had spent her life breaking through barriers and proving that she belonged. But her real legacy wouldn't be found in the statistics about how many women she had trained, or how many missions she had successfully completed. Her real legacy would be found in the example she had set about what it meant to serve. To serve didn't just mean to follow orders. It meant to think deeply about what those orders meant. It meant to question when something didn't feel right. It meant to be willing to sacrifice your own advancement for the truth. Her daughters would remember this. They would teach their own children this. And those children would teach theirs. That was how integrity spread through generations. That was how the military, despite its flaws, eventually pulled itself toward righteousness. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear overhead, Sarah smiled. She had kept her promise to the young servicemen who had died in Kandahar. She had made sure their deaths were not simply written off as casualties of war, footnotes in a classified report. She had made sure that the truth, eventually, came into the light. And that light, Sarah knew, would continue to shine for a very long time.